Thank you so much. So this is going to be a little bit of a whirlwind tour through some of the things that we've been doing in Ireland regarding Wikidata, some of them much longer standing projects and others work that is unfolding. And then finally, we're going to take a look at, I suppose, not necessarily just my personal wish list, but data that's out there that is related to Ireland, that is coming from Ireland, that has yet to find its way into Wikidata for one reason or another, and kind of the utility it would have both locally and internationally. We'll see whether nope, it's not going to, there we go. So the main thing that we've done regarding Wikidata is, there we go, Wiki Loves Monuments. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a later session, so I won't labor this too much, but I suppose I'll focus on how the project evolved and was allowed to expand quite dramatically using Wikidata. So Wikimedia Community Ireland, which is the user group to which I am project coordinator, was founded in 2014, and the very first project that we did, aside from one or two editathons that year, was that we did Wiki Loves Monuments for the first time in Ireland. And the way we started off was we had a discrete list from the National Monument Service. So that's ancient monuments in Ireland, so stones and fields primarily. And that was about 550 sites. There was also a small smattering of sites that were in, so these are sites that are in public ownership, so there is access to them. And then there was a small amount of what we call local authority sites as well. And so local authority, they're kind of managed and accessed and cared for at a local level as opposed to a national level. This initial list was hand curated. So we were given kind of a bit of a pick a mix of different data sets, some PDFs, some Excel documents. We were allowed to scrape the National Monument Service website, which gave us a lot of data that actually we couldn't use, primarily because of access issues. An awful lot of national monuments and recorded sites in Ireland are on private land, especially when you're talking about ancient sites, so hill forts, ring forts, kind of, I suppose, very ancient monuments. So we whittled it down. We had our 550, and that was 2014, and we were very happy with that. And we used, at the time, we used a WordPress plugin to develop a map. So that was all hand curated, hand assembled. Flash forward to 2017, and we were able to access a simple APG, so a simple annual plan grant. And we were able with that to engage Pavel in Poland to help us expand that list quite dramatically from our about, so between those few years, we probably expanded the list. We're probably hitting about 800 sites by the time we got to 2016. We had very specifically, I suppose, targeted some sites that were related to what we referred to as the decade of centenary that was going on at that time in Ireland. But the huge shift that we had was incorporating this quite large data set, which is the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage. In Ireland, National Monument Service kind of broadly goes up to 1,700 as a year. And then everything more modern than that goes to the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, so it covers the 20th century as well. At the time, and we'll discuss this a little bit more, the government here in Ireland hadn't adopted any kind of open data strategy, but the National Inventory had always published its data sets, not with an explicit open license, but they were just freely available. There was no restrictions on them. You could download them from the website, and there was nothing stopping you from reuse. But when we approached them to use the data in this way, they did ask us to kind of consider a few things within it. And you can see there that we have some kind of the limits on the data. There's an awful lot of private dwellings. Also, again, structures that are on private land, but also structures that are now sites that could be sensitive. So hospitals, schools, residential homes, things like that. So again, there was an element of the hand curation, pulling out any structure that was identified as perhaps private or sensitive in that way. So we now we're probably tipping towards 7,000 sites within Wikidata. So Pavel worked with me to prepare the data from the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage and some more National Monuments Service sites to prepare that data for import into Wikidata. We do use the rather controversial Wiki Loves Monuments ID on Wikidata, which I know kind of inspires strong feelings among some people. But the reason that we use it is that they're Other people have uploaded national monuments and National Inventory of Architectural Heritage sites to either Wikidata, or they have Wikipedia articles, so they have, appeared on Wikidata. And they will have perhaps some of the nomenclature and a number relating to either of these data sets. But because they are on either private land, or it is a site that we cannot, as a community, encourage people to try and visit in any kind of demonstrable sense, it allows us to maintain, I suppose, that trust with the department that we've dealt with both of these services here, so that we are not encouraging people to trespass or otherwise visit what could be very sensitive or very delicate sites. There's some kind of interesting things that's had an impact on, I suppose, the variety of sites that we have had to, that our competition, there's kind of a strange weighting now towards particular structures. So you can see here, probably not surprising from an international point of view, the preponderance of sites in Ireland are church buildings. And I hope that people aren't telling me to slow down. That's good. I know I nearly always turn off, or I nearly always start off far too fast. But you can see it's mostly church buildings and bridges. So this makes sense both from, I suppose, a historical point of view. Ireland is known for its being the island of saints and scholars, but also these are publicly accessible sites. You could be pretty sure that a church building is open to the public for a demonstrable amount of time. Now, within that, there are former churches, and from the data sets that we're working from, sometimes it could be quite difficult to ascertain whether or not this was a site that you could encourage people to visit. Thankfully, an awful lot of these sites, churches, but also railway stations, cemeteries. You can see there we also have banks, stately homes, lighthouses, libraries, post offices. So even if they are no longer in their original use, or even, the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage has been going on. They started their survey in the late 2000s. So there will have been change between now and then. Even if the change has happened, they are probably buildings that you can take a photograph of from the street. So there isn't those issues of trespass or otherwise engaging with the site that, might be private ownership and somebody might come out wondering why you're taking a photograph of their house. Bridges, obviously, unless I did come across a few discrete examples of bridges that are on private land that are they went over disused canals or dried up rivers. So they're no longer on they're probably on a historical public highway, but they're no longer on a public highway, as it were. So I literally combed through most of these sites by hand. Again, there was an element of hand curation, which has meant that I suppose I haven't had the time since then to comb back through it again. One of the major issues that we have is that the data set accessible from the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage only goes up to their publicly accessible one 2015, whereas if you look at their map, they have continued to survey. They are still conducting their survey, particularly in Dublin, but those sites are only accessible through their map function, which is tied up with issues that we'll look at now in a moment. So we're kind of artificially stalled a little bit as regards when they plan on updating the publicly available data set. Another thing that I really wanted to highlight, and some of you who engage in multilingual elements of Wikidata may have noticed, I know the Welsh community noticed when suddenly Irish language content on Wikidata shot up since 2019. And this is the work of Dr. Kevin Scannell, and those of you who joined us for Celtic Knot in 2020 will be familiar with his work. He was one of our keynotes. He has done absolutely phenomenal work using Wikidata to support quite interesting projects regarding the Irish language. So since late 2019, he's added labels and descriptions in Irish to over 12 million, and this is incorporating various different data sets that he has been able to either leverage into an appropriate license or has used tools and collaborators to create this content. There is an explicit goal as regards enriching its functionality outside of Wikidata, but also explicitly to use Wikidata info boxes on Wikipage. We have been thinking about this since probably since 2019, 2018, but unfortunately when we were deploying them on Wikipage, due to the lack of the Irish language on Wikidata, there was just an awful lot of English language creep, which, as we all know, if you're a minority language, seeing the dominant language bleed into your small language Wikipedia is not ideal. So these are being deployed manually. There's a couple of editors involved in it. From what I could tell, it was quite difficult because there isn't, unlike beautiful categories on Commons and other places, when a Wikidata box is added to an article, it doesn't populate it with a category, unfortunately. So I very kind of roughly guessed that a little bit less than, in and around between 3,500 and 4,000 articles appear to have a Wikidata info box at the moment. And they are literally being added by hand, but we don't have a monitoring category at the moment, unfortunately. A really interesting project that I wanted to flag with you, a kind of a utility of Wikidata. So, sorry, let me go back. Kevin has produced a linguistic atlas. And what he's done is he's looking at the Irish language over 100 years. So going back to the 1920s with publications from An Gúm, which is the Irish government press. So dictionaries and things like that. Yes, Jane, I think I'm probably, or I'm not, I need a tutorial on PetScan to be able to use it properly. So looking at 100 years of the Irish language and tracking the use of, because Irish is quite linguistically diverse, there are 3 major dialects, and within those there are different uses, different word uses. So he's using Wikidata, social media posts, and these established corpuses of Irish language to track and map the different linguistic diversity that you see in Ireland. So these are just 2 interesting, and I have the hyperlink, and the link, the slides are shared in the talk information if you want to follow these through. So on that map there, you can see that this is tracking, this is an Irish word for a small boy, a garsour or a garsoon. And you can see that the blue there is garsour, and garsoon is used more so in kind of the larger Munster area. And you get kind of a smattering of it. So these are people probably traveling. They're probably not from these areas. But what I quite like here is this is also the linguistic diversity of people using some controversial translations of the word tweet. So we have tweet. So these are people tweeting in Irish since 2015. And you can see that we have kind of competing terms for when you're actually talking about what a tweet is. And part of the reason that this one in particular is somewhat controversial is that it has a V in it. And it's one of the reasons that Irish people also some people don't like Wikipedia as a translation of Wikipedia, because traditionally Irish doesn't have a V in it. It's one of what's referred to as the hateful 8, the 8 letters that don't appear in the traditional Irish language. But just a really nice application and an investigation using Wikidata. So very quickly, some of our challenges for the future. So as I mentioned earlier, in 2017, following an open consultation, the Irish government adopted an open data policy, and with a preference towards the CC BY 4.0 license. I have a link there, so the data is all available in data.gov.ie. It's a mixture of all sorts of data sets produced by various different public bodies in Ireland. So it goes from there's an awful lot of local authority, and it's not particularly geographically spread. So there's an awful lot coming from the greater Dublin area, which is not particularly surprising, kind of the largest metropolitan area. But from transport to literally kind of registrations of secondhand car sales and things like that, to education. So kind of broadly reports on education as well as educational outcomes and things like that. Energy, which looking at kind of has interesting things around where you can and cannot place windmills and things like that. Some of this data, as you can imagine, is hyper-local. So one of the ones that I noticed is all of the street bin locations in Dublin, which, some people would feel very excitable about. But some of them are international, and one that I would quite like, thank you very much, Johanna, quite like a little bit of help with is the National Gallery of Ireland finally opened up a small amount of its collections in early this year. And the portal is quite problematic, the way in which you can, there's no way of scraping all of the images from it. You download them as a zip file. But there is this data set, which I noticed yesterday, which maps both the file location of the artwork and some of the data related to it. So these collections specifically would not just be of a native Irish interest. So if anybody is interested in helping me get that onto Wikidata/Commons, do get in touch. There are some caveats on this open data, and I'll finish up with this. Everything since 1966, mapping in Ireland is by the Ordnance Survey of Ireland, and they have it explicit. They are a semi-state body, and they explicitly make money. So everything is under copyright with them. State bodies use Ordnance Survey of Ireland maps, which means that the map data is under copyright. So you do have to be very careful when you're looking at these data sets, what maps were used, how GPS coordinates were generated. You just have to be quite careful with that work. And also for our colleagues in OpenStreetMap and other projects, the lack of the share alike in the favored Creative Commons license is an issue. And does, even if the government wouldn't necessarily want to, I suppose, police the reuse of various data sets, on a fundamental level, they don't want to be seen to, I suppose, be stepping on anybody's toes that way. And that is it for me. If you have any questions, please do let me know. And yes, if somebody could show me PetScan, I would be forever grateful. I attempted to do it earlier this year for various different things, and I don't know how successful I was. So this is how you get in touch with me. And I'd like to give a huge thank you to Dr. Kevin Scannell for sharing, he's being so generous to share with me the work that he's been doing, and to point me to some very interesting projects. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions? Very, very quickly.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. So we've got a discussion section at the end of this session, so probably we can save questions for then, unless there's any particularly relevant ones right now. I've not seen any in the chat or on the pad. So if it's okay, let's transition to the next talk, which is, lost it now, by Alicia. Alicia, are you there? Yes.
Alicia, I've just given you presenter's rights. So do you want to upload a PDF or share your screen? Oh.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, you're muted somehow. Oh, you have, I think you have joined the session by just listening. Is when you signed in for this session, you took the listen only option. I can see that on the headphones. I think you need to rejoin the session and select the other one. You know, the one that contains the word microphone. Yeah.
How about this?
Oh,
yes.
Okay, great. That's even better. How did you do that?
I clicked on something that said leave audio, and
Cool.
I left audio. How do I share
That's
my
even
screen? Let's see.
You can click on the plus if you want to upload a PDF, and if you want to share the screen, there
Oh,
should.
I got it. Window, share
Yeah,
a window.
cool.
Now where is my window? Let's see. Here it is, and it should show up here, and it shows up here. Oh,
Something's happening.
something's happening. Can you see my presentation?
Not yet, but I see
I can-
rotating arrows. Looks like
Okay.
something's on the way.
It says here that I'm sharing it.
Yeah. If you could go into full screen mode for that
Yeah.
window, that would be even better, I guess. But we can see something already, so that's
Oh,
very good.
We can see it, but it's got big black bars top and bottom. Oh, that's better.
oh, perfect. Now that we are on track, first of all, thank you, Rebecca, for talking about Wiki Loves Monuments in Ireland, because uploading monuments to Wikidata is something that I'm going to touch upon. But my main topic in this lightning talk is structured data on commons and how it fits in the whole Wiki Loves Monuments ecosystem. Some background: I am a developer at Wikimedia Sverige, And as you might have heard, we are developing the first thematic hub in the Wikimedia ecosystem that is focused around content partnerships, in which we aim at taking a coordinating and help desk role for the Wikimedia community to better work with content partnerships on our platforms. And part of the work that we're doing, that you can read all about it on Meta, is, as I said, coordinating and taking this sort of central role in identifying data that is important and that really should be uploaded to the Wikimedia platforms. And as part of that, we have been working a lot with structured data on commons, because it has a great potential to bring a lot of more value to the files on commons. It makes them easier to discover, to search, and it makes it, using the Sparkle endpoint, easier to research and analyze. The new search engine, the media search engine that was launched on the Wikimedia Commons earlier this year, uses structured data on commons to provide better search results to users, which makes it even more important to have good structured data. If any of you have uploaded any files to Wikimedia Commons, then you have probably noticed that there are bots that extract basic information about those files and put them as structured data statements, such as inception, source of file, who made it, and so on. And we have decided to work on adding more data to photos from Wiki Loves Monuments, because they are an extremely valuable resource. Only this year we got over 160,000 photos from 27 countries. And since all the photos depict identified cultural heritage sites, we can add structured data statements about what they depict and also which local edition of the Wiki Loves Monuments competition they participated in. And the way we do it is by parsing the templates that have to be included in every photo in the competition. So, for example, we can see very easily, like here, in which local and global edition this photo participated in. And then we can look at the so-called monument template. There are obviously different templates for the different countries, but usually they have some sort of unique ID number, which, if the monument is on Wikidata, if it has an item on Wikidata and it also has the same ID, then we can map it very easily and add a depict statement to the photo on Commons. I mentioned we are adding information about which edition the photo participated in. So obviously the big part of this process was actually making the items for the local editions on Wikidata, since they had not been created previously in any sort of systematic way. They were like a couple individual ones that someone created when they needed it. But I think it's very valuable to actually create them systematically now. In this link that you have here, it goes to a listeria list, which shows which editions have been created on Wikidata. it's only a small selection of countries. I've been mostly making them as I needed them for particular SDC projects. And also we had to figure out like how to model the competition editions. So you can all have a look at them and yeah, figure out if that modeling makes sense, and maybe also create new ones for your own country. One of the powers of structured data on commons is that it can be queried with the Wikimedia Commons query service, which is not perfect right now. It is still in beta version, which means it's not 100% stable. And also it takes, I think it still takes at least a week for the new data to populate it. So it can't be used in real time to track the changes, which is a shame, but you can already do some interesting things with it. Like in this example, I'm mapping the photos from the different editions of the Swedish competition that have coordinates in the photo. And I can, in the map, color the dots to show in which edition they participated in. And obviously, these are not all the photos from the Swedish competition because not all of them have coordinates. Obviously, the newer photos have coordinates in a much higher extent because more people take photos of their mobile phones that embed coordinates by default. But this is still a very interesting exercise, and it shows what can be done. A couple words about what we have done. Earlier this year, we've done some pilot uploads to photos from Sweden, Israel, and some photos from Poland. And in September, we started doing it on a much larger scale, where we added SDC statements to over 200,000 photos from several countries, including Ireland, Finland, a couple LATAM countries, and so on. Our challenges right now, not all monuments are on Wikidata. The Irish ones are, which is very nice. Not all photos in the competition have templates with ID numbers, which is necessary to automatically match them to Wikidata. And we would also like to expand this work to other areas, for example, Wiki Loves Earth. But Wiki Loves Earth, even though it is a very big competition, it's not as well structured as Wiki Loves Monuments because it doesn't use the same system with templates and ID numbers to the same extent. Thank you for listening. I hope I managed to not take too long a time. We have a content partnerships hub report newsletter on Outreach Wiki that we just started last month. So October's one will be up soon, where we try to put updates about our current work with the Content Partnerships Hub, including the strategic data uploads. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Perfect timing. There's a question, a quick one from Éder Porto. How local Wiki Loves Monument event can participate in this project?
Well, first of all, the monuments should be uploaded to Wikidata with some sort of ID number, like the ID number that is used in the monuments list. That is a prerequisite. And yeah, I noticed that some local competitions don't really have a good coverage of monuments on Wikidata. But that is the part of uploading to Wikidata. That is also something that we can help others with.
Okay, thank you. So next talk is by Susanna. We can come back to any other questions in the discussion at the end of this session.
Oops. Hello, I seem to have a side light here and with a little bit of dirt on my camera, so it's going to give this nice atmosphere. So hi, I am Susanna. I represent Avoin Glam, which is a collaboration group in Finland between Wikimedia Finland, Creative Commons Finland and Open Knowledge Finland. And practically I'm in charge for the GLAM activities of Wikimedia Finland, and we have done, as you probably saw on Alicia's slides, that we've been putting our Wiki Loves Monuments, or the monuments in Wiki Loves Monuments, to Wikidata since we started participating in Wiki Loves Monuments. Anyway, so together with the Indian community, in a project that I run independently, which is called Wiki Documentaries, we made a campaign and a banner for Wiki Loves Monuments to upload images through this Wiki Documentaries project that I run. And I'd like to show you first what the project looks like, and then how we did it and what it includes. So starting sharing, and let's see how this goes. And there's a cat here that may take over the screen as well, but let's see how that goes. Right. I will first show you the Great Sphinx, which is definitely a monument. And this is the Wiki Documentaries site. It is a multilingual site showing data from Wikidata and other Wikimedia projects. And I will be talking more about this later today. And this it's a way to display the information that is there in a Wikidata item, and it also can connect to external sites and other Wikimedia projects. And this is something that we are currently thinking how to expand to different areas. So the interesting new thing that we thought of together with the Indian community is to connect it with the campaigns. Do you see this, by the way, this Wiki Documentaries and campaigns page, by the way? Not necessarily. Let me see. I will share again. Okay, you're seeing that one. So I'm going to share again. Here. So this is one of the Indian heritage sites in the Wiki Loves Monuments competition. And to that page, we were able to include this banner, which you see below the image, which has the text about the competition and an upload button, which is generally what you would have either on your site or on Wikimedia Commons Wiki Loves Monuments pages. And this is also how it was linked from the Indian Wiki Loves Monuments pages. You see the small logo on the left-hand column, which would take you to the page that I just showed you previously. So here on the fourth row, you have that specific monument, and by clicking on the tiny icon, you would be taken to that page. And on that page, then you will have that banner, and from that banner, you would go to the upload campaign, and which would then create all the necessary information for the templates for the listings and the Wikimedia Commons info page. So what we would need for this? Of course, one would need the monuments to be on Commons, but this is the data that this banner needs, and this would be so wonderful if everything that is there on Wikimedia or on Wikidata, all the monuments and sites on different contexts, could have such a automatically created banner. You know, it would start on the right day, it would go to the right campaign, it would have the right information, it would be translated to all the languages that the basic information or the banner information has been translated to. And I'm actually challenging maybe Alicia here to discuss this. Maybe we might not be able to do it in today's discussion, but even later or in any other context, to be able to create such external parts for this Wikimedia contest. So I guess this would be it. I will welcome questions now or later.
We're quite early. We've got another 5 minutes. So,
I know. I thought it would be short. Yeah. Oh, there's Body. I think it would be nice if Body might be able to share his screen and audio, because he is the one who we've been doing this with.
Yeah, sorry, Susanna, I was not ready.
Yeah,
So,
I know, but yes, we have extra time, but you don't have.
Okay.
Okay. So, if you are okay, we can go on already to the next presenter, and if the next presenter is ready.
So the
Okay.
next is Éder, yeah.
Yeah. Welcome, Éder, and thanks for the opportunity.
Éder, you would also need to switch from what was it called? Leave audio, right? Is what you should also do, so we can also hear you. Something's happening. I want to say that's promising. Ah, yeah. Okay, you're now muted, but that can be solved easily, I guess.
Hello.
Yay! Hello. Cool.
Great.
You now have also presenting rights, presenters' rights. If someone could tell me what the right term is, I will gladly keep using it. Thank you.
Where should I click to present?
Do you want to upload a PDF or you want to share your screen?
Oh, I'll share my screen.
So underneath this big white welcome to the session thing, there's a screen icon. You can click on that, and then the rest should hopefully self-explanatory. It's looking good. Some errors are rotating. Yes, cool. We can see your screen now. Thank you.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Éder Porto. This is my full big name. And I'll be presenting Wikidata at the heart of Wiki Loves Monuments, a Brazilian experience. I can't never talk about Wiki Loves Monuments as a Brazilian experience taking other experiences. So I like to focus on Brazil. First, I want to talk about the state of the art of Wiki Loves Monuments in Brazil. So everyone knows Wiki Loves Monuments at this point, and this is the workflow for Wiki Loves Monuments on Brazil. in Brazil that we developed since 2019. So we have a set of steps with a lot of arrows, but they are easy to find the path. So you start here where the monument is listed as heritage, and then is published in lists and laws, and then these lists and websites that gather these monuments are scraped or downloaded and through Python scripts. Beautiful Soup is a pretty useful package, or manual selection in some cases, but it has a lot of scraping in Brazil in particular, because not every state, not every city has an organized or an organization, an institution that do this work of structuring their information about the cultural heritage they helped. So this is the block of off-wiki work, because we are working on the pre-event level, gathering the monuments. Then we go to the on-wiki part. That is, once we have all the monuments listed and scraped, downloaded, we clean the metadata and we match with Wikidata items for these monuments, or we create new ones. And once we create the monuments on Wikidata, these monuments are automatically listed in the contest pages. We have our lists using Listeria and Cartographer, the extension Cartographer, to show a map of the monuments that have no image, and the Listeria to show all the monuments by state or by city. I'll jump on the tracking here. And once we have these lists, then in the month of the event, we have the monument being identified by the user through WikShootMe, nearby, or the Cartographer extension that goes to the map. It is in the monuments list. And then we have the monument photographed, and we have these tools that help the users to identify and like make a checklist of monuments that they photographed. Then these monuments are uploaded to Wikimedia Commons. That is the usual procedure with Wiki Loves Monuments. The big innovation in Wiki Loves Monuments in Brazil is the heavy use of Wikidata lists of monuments. We have 3 categories of prizes this year. We have best images, that this goes to the international jury. We have best image from Bahia, and I'll explain why Bahia and why we have this category of prizes. And we have this last arrow, that once the monuments are uploaded, the photographs are uploaded to Wikimedia Commons, these images are linked to Wikidata items. This process is, as of today, pretty manual, and but we usually use quick statements as well when we have a big number of images to match with the Wikidata items. These photographs are then used in a very big gamma of Wikimedia projects like Wikipedia or Wikisource or Wikibooks, and even in Commons as well. The categories, the info boxes, they are automatically updated using Wikidata. So Wikidata Infobox and Commons, and in Portuguese, Wikipedia as well. So once we have this last category of prizes that is the biggest contributors that have monuments that aren't listed, aren't photographed before the beginning of the event. Users contribute their images, and then at the end of the event, we count how many monuments that person contributed. But this is a general walk through the Wiki Loves Monuments process on Wiki Loves Monuments in Brazil. So since the beginning, since 2019, when the user group Wiki Movement Brazil assumed the Wiki Loves Monuments local in Brazil, we used Wikidata. So as you can see, since 2015, when Wiki Loves Monuments Brazil started, from 2018, we had pretty much the same amount of monuments that used only the federal level of heritage listing. So in 2019, 20, and 2021, we uploaded more than 8,000 monuments to Wikidata. A lot of them with coordinates, but a lot of them don't have this. And in this graph, this chart, you can see in green and yellow the number of images used that has been growing up since 2019. And I associate this with the use of Wikidata. Of course, we have more monuments. We will have more monuments illustrated and a diverse set of monuments. That is really important since the beginning of our organization of Wiki Loves Monuments. So in this slide, you can see the page for the listing of monuments. You have a link as well. My slides are in Wikimedia Commons. And in this page, you have a link to other states' lists. You have automated lists using Listeria with division. This is a list of the state of Espírito Santo and is divided by cities. So we have also the use of extension of cartographer to list this map using the coordinates of the monuments that don't have images. So this is a Listeria as well, that I made a transclusion, excluding all this jargon from Listeria to just show the map. The second part of my presentation is about actions and thoughts about the bias of cultural representation. That is something that we cared and always think about when we are working with Wiki Loves Monuments, because it's a reproduction of a bias in society, and we are trying to fix society at some extent, trying to not reproduce the society bias on cultural representation. So as you can see, this is there are 3 maps of Brazil. We have, I'm right here in São Paulo, this bird-like state, and these are the most rich states in the country from this the 7 states. And we have, since this first is from 2019 to 2020, 2021, and we have the states colored by the number of images contributed by photographers on the Wiki Loves Monuments editions. So in 2019, we have a lot of states represented, but we don't have few states that are always underrepresented. For example, since 2019, we don't have any images of those two states, Amapá and Roraima, and Acre as well. And we have some states that don't have representation. They have a low number of monuments, but we aren't able to engage people from that area yet to contribute to Wiki Loves Monuments. And we have a big representation of São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, and the state of Bahia is always present, thanks to Paul, that is the next presenter. So the number of monuments in Wikidata per state, we are doing this import to Wikidata of monuments from Brazil since 2019, but we have conscience that this upload of monuments to Wikidata also represents cultural bias by importing monuments from rich states that have their structure, their monuments is structured in a list, in a bold and solid institution. And we have, on the other side, states that are less wealthy in terms of money, for example, and less wealthy, and they don't have the structure to neither build this list or even make the outreach of this list for the public. So we have here the poorer states are the North region and the Northwest region, and we have a lot of monuments, mainly from São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. Both of them combined represent 63%, not only them, but the Southeast region, that is the richer region, represents 63%, and São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro together represents 53% of the whole set of monuments in Wiki Loves Monuments in Brazil. And the other regions, you have the Midwest, that are these three states with only 1.5% of monuments. This is in a list of 10,000 monuments. So again, we acknowledge this biased representation of monuments and photographs from these monuments, and to try to fix that a little, we implemented this year this prize for Bahia, for example. We wanted to start with a big state that has a number of contributors, in a lot of contributors from Brazil, but has a underrepresentation in the Wiki projects and in the Wiki Loves Monuments as well. So we started to focus on Bahia, and now this year we have a prize especially focused on that state, and next year the idea is to move from state to state. So next year we'll have a prize, I think, for Espírito Santo, that is this state here, that is from the southeast region, the less wealthy. And for that, we have these specific prizes. This is the prize for the best images, the biggest contributors, and the best image from Bahia. This biggest contributors, it's an effort that we had since 2019 to give recognition to users that don't make a Wiki Loves Monuments high-tech photograph, but help us illustrate the monuments that are out of the curve of out of the route of tourist route for the monuments in Brazil. And the last part, and I think is one last slide, is challenges and plans for the future. And our biggest challenge is in Wiki Loves Monuments globally and in Brazil is to analyze and increase retention rate of participants. Globally, this rate is 8.8% in general, and 2.84 for newcomers. So we have more than three-quarters of participants in Wiki Loves Monuments since all editions are newcomers, and only 2.84% of them participate in the next edition. In Brazil, this rate is very low. We have 2.77% and 0.88% in this for the newcomers. And my idea is maybe personalize the context, showing how the images are being used, and we have experience that in-person contact with these editors helps their retention, increase their retention. And we have also another challenge and plan for the future is how do we increase the coverage of these subrepresented states and regions. And as of today, there are 55% of Brazilian monuments without an image on Wikimedia Commons. Great part of that is in the Southeast region, but we have states in the other regions that they have a low number of monuments and they also don't have any images. So we need to fix this, for example, for them to have at least one image of the monument. Have an image of a monument is important to us, especially in Brazil, because we are in a special government that have no care for cultural entities, and a lot of monuments are in danger of being destroyed or getting consumed by fire, like the Museu Nacional or other museums and institutions that are burning in Brazil. And we want to explore more properties related to images. We started this year, not only P18, but other images about the interior, the aerial view of these monuments as well, and create more monuments on Wikidata, and provide documentation and support on how to do mass uploads. This is a challenge that we had this year with users that asked for help on how to do. We do week takes events. So we go to a city and photograph the whole city, a historical city, and then how do we upload this mass number of images? So this is something that we plan to do next year before the event, and establish partnerships with photo clubs and promote more these Week Takes events. And I think that's it. This is my contact, and thank you. I think I passed the time.
Thank you very much, Éder. Yeah, I think you're a few minutes over, but it's not a big problem. So let's save questions for the discussion. So if we can hand over to Paul now. We good? Paul, hopefully you are there. We can't hear you at the moment.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I don't know where my video is. Oh, here I am. I'm going to share my...
Yep, we can see you as well.
Great. Do you want to share some? Oh, you're already in the process. Great. You don't need me.
Beginning. I can't see you
Looking
all,
good.
but
Oh,
great.
yeah, we
Shall I
can.
start?
Go for it.
Yeah, my name is Paul Burley, and I'm a librarian, metadata librarian at Northwestern University. I live in Chicago, Illinois, and I want to pick up directly where Éder left off because I was just working in the field, literally often fields, for 2 years, photographing monuments, and I have an experience as just a photographer rather than a high-level person like Éder, doing photography in the states of Bahia and Sergipe, which have a common history within Brazil, and Bahia has a history that I think has a lot in common with the United States. And so I worked for 2 years. I didn't really know anything about the competition that I can remember at all. And I only have some interest in the competition now because my objective is, as a librarian, I prepare and catalog a lot of books from Bahia because of our collection at Northwestern. They often lack images, whereas I think our counterparts in France, Germany, or even here in the United States would have a rich set of photos to work with. I didn't feel like that existed in Brazil because I was actually working with the academic materials. And I'd originally been writing Wikipedia articles about Japan, where I lived for several years. I changed over to writing about Bahia, and I had no images to work with at all, despite the fact that there's a UNESCO World Heritage Site in both Bahia and Sergipe of great importance, in my opinion. So what's changed based on Éder's work of having structured lists to support the competition? It's changed my work profoundly because before I was working from scattered lists that I'd find online, a few documents from the federal government in Brazil, a bit from state organizations, but there just wasn't much. I was making up my own lists and eventually using this 7-volume set. I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but I got to the point where I was carrying this around to the field, and since this book was published in the 1970s, the photography was taken then. I have a thumbnail view of these monuments, and as a person going to this site, how do you match what you see in a black and white thumbnail at the left with what I found on the right? So there was a gap there. And then in 2019, I was in Espírito Santo, and I was contacted by João Pshansky and saw these lists based on structured data and Wikidata for the first time, and it was such a huge revelation to have the lists, have some rich data in electronic format, to be able to analyze gaps, to analyze photos that were maybe from the 1950s, maybe from the 1970s, or from the advent of digital photography, because a lot of their images are aging in commons. So that improved my situation drastically. I also believe, since I'm interested in documenting these sites as architectural sites and not necessarily for an artistic photography competition. The use of Wikidata in that we're adding more properties for all types of images, I think is going to mature our documentation of these sites. It's really exciting to started operating a drone, because I should have said this at the beginning. I'm a librarian. I'm not a photographer, and I'm not an architect at all. But I'm now operating a drone to get really good aerial views, and pretty nervous about this going to Brazil this time. I just got back, I think, 2 weeks ago. But it worked in Salvador so far, despite not understanding the laws very well. But I'm really excited that we're able to explore the new properties, aerial view, plan, improve our interior view. It helps us to, combined with Wikipedia and other projects, get closer to something that looks like an actual architectural survey. Yeah, and a property that photographers really need is direction of facade. And I really look forward to adding this so that, oh yeah, there's, good Lord, 2019 versus 2018, working with this was amazing. But this sort of, even now, this is from a week and a half ago, what hasn't changed, and despite having structured lists, is that in Bahia and Sergipe, I learned quickly from my first visit to these places, don't rely on electronic maps in any form, which we can easily do in Chicago, or I really prefer to photograph in my home state of Michigan. Just open it on my cell phone and follow along doing the photography. There's not great cell phone connections, and when I'm working, I prefer to carry as little equipment as possible. And something Wikidata can't necessarily help out with is the concept of a photography assignment and a photography workflow. Well, I don't know exactly what I'm going to find when I get to these sites. Wikidata isn't really going to capture sort of the things that you see in the notes about how to get to these sites. Really basic things like, how do I get from Chicago to the UNESCO World Heritage Site of, sorry, I slaughtered the pronunciation, São Cristóvão in Sergipe, which had very few photos. Yeah, it doesn't capture access. I don't know that it captures cultural issues. They were mentioned earlier, and I found it interesting as a person who just takes photos. Hospitals, schools. I wouldn't photograph an archaeological site myself. And gosh, I'm losing my train of thought. Oh, in Bahia, especially Terreiros, which are places of Afro-Brazilian religious worship, and takes a lot. I mean, we'd love to have an image, and we'd love to have, all the Terreiros represented on all these beautiful lists. But the reality is, working with Terreiros one by one, some which happily permit photography, others for religious, cultural, and societal reasons don't want a photographer around at all. Something overall in Brazil, and to some extent here in Chicago and my home state of Michigan, are non-designated monuments that are listed in these inventories, or when I'm just at a site, I see buildings that I think should be a listed building, and I don't know how those fit in with the competition or fit in with the sites, especially because the historic architectural ensembles in Brazil are rich and include many buildings. The history of 20th century modernism in Brazil is important, but not reflected in the lists at all. And I'll end this, I hope not after the time, because I can't see a clock here. I don't think my photography skills in any form match the importance of documenting these sites. I thought you could just buy a camera and take photos. That's like thinking you can buy a piano and be a pianist the next day, which is not true at all. So in January, even though I'm 50 years old, I'm returning to community college, which you might know as a 2-year school, or you know, starting out in school, to actually, after 4 or 5 years of doing this work, properly learn how to be a photographer. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Paul. That was perfect timing.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next session we've got is a discussion. So I'm hoping all the previous presenters will be able to turn their cameras back on and rejoin the discussions. Again, Rebecca. And do we have Éder?
Yes.
Right. And Susanna and Alicia? Susanna, Alicia, are you still there? Okay, I guess not. They don't seem to be on the list of people, so I think it's the three of you. So it's basically up to you now. We've got about half an hour to have a general discussion. I can leave you to it. I can try to facilitate. It's entirely up to you.
As is the way with Wikipedians, I was very quickly making an edit there because I finally found a citation. I was arguing with somebody on the talk page. I apologize for that. What I found really interesting, and I mentioned it in the chat, and I think it's been highlighted by both Éder and Paul, I suppose the utility of Wiki Loves Monuments and the ability for Wikidata to kind of give that granularity of interior versus aerial versus plan. And I think it's something we've reached a level of maturity in Ireland as well now that perhaps we need to start incorporating that, because we have, I suppose, a very rich set of images for those very prominent sites that, you know, perennially every single year you'll get more photographs of it. And for us, it's not just churches. There are a few sites like Kilmainham Jail, which is a very historic and very famous jail, and other places like Trinity Library, where the Book of Kells is, and things like that. At what point did you kind of feel, are you still kind of exploring that, Éder, or Was there a point? Was there kind of like a shift when you kind of got into so many years of Wiki Loves Monuments that felt like, okay, this is the tipping point. We absolutely have to do this now.
We had last year we had a lot of contribution from Paul, especially with a lot of images that we saw. The monuments were already illustrated on the lists, but they weren't images of the monument itself, like a photography of, I forgot the name of the type of photography, but like the exterior, the facade photography of the monument. And then how do we do this? Let's check, let's make a query to see what are the images properties on Wikidata. And this year, with a more organized mindset, like we do daily the linking between the images and the items on Wikidata. So we see a user contributed 10 images, then we go there and see this is an entrance image, this is an image for itself, this is an interior image, this is an aerial view, and we go there and put this images there. So from the last year to this year, we established that we needed to include more image properties, because we weren't getting a lot of usage of the images from the competition with just P18, because the monuments were already illustrated. We have, I think, let me check, 14 image properties used this year in Wiki Loves Monuments Brazil. Not just this, but for example, the floor plan, floor blueprint of the monuments. This is something that Wikidata uses, and we have from plaques with these on the monuments themselves. So we thought that it's good to add this.
We have a few questions being read through. There's actually something that I wanted to just ask Paul. I think it's really interesting that and I've come across this with contributors to Wiki Loves Monuments in Ireland as well. Like, they're very quick to say, oh, I'm not a photographer. I'm just, I'm really interested in the built heritage of X. Or one that we had last year who got our special prize, he runs the canals in Ireland. So just out of interest, he started documenting all of the built heritage around it. So last year he got our special prize for photographing, adding the first image of most of the bridges. So if you look at our map of the images taken versus images met, you can actually start tracing the canals across Ireland, because he's taken most of the photographs of them. But he would also say, oh, I'm no photographer, I'm just keenly interested. Is there some way that we could, I don't know, kind of explode that out? Because Wiki Loves Monuments does, I think, create hesitations with people who don't think they're a proficient or a good photographer. They're just keen on kind of the overarching idea of representing cultural heritage. Is there a halfway point? Like, what would be a sweet spot to just kind of encourage people to maybe upload photographs out of utility rather than out of kind of artistic merit?
I'm thinking a lot about this as my process moves along. I have a sense that my goal needs to be, I mean, right now the situation in Brazil, unlike Chicago or Michigan, is representation. We need the single image. I don't care if it comes from a cell phone, which I think cell phone photography has become quite sophisticated, and that's probably something we need to talk about with Wiki Loves Monuments Brazil. We have some sessions we can do on these sort of things. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but my next goal is to have a quality image of each site. Since my concern is with, I guess, academia, publishing, used by students, researchers, whatever. I don't think just a representative photo taken in whatever form or however old works for my goal as a librarian. It, at this point, needs to be a documentary photo and a quality image together. So maybe that's my personal bias. Yeah, and I see it with the German competition, others in Europe, that there's a huge emphasis on quality images. And yeah, as Wikidata, as a structured tool, moves this competition or set of images farther along, I see us heading there. So I don't know if that answered your question.
I think it's been a tension, I think, in all the photo competitions that we do, because there is kind of a, you know, something is better than nothing in a lot of cases, but you know, how do you raise that bar? And I think I come from a cataloging background as well, or a museum cataloging background, and I kind of think of the initial images as like the skeletal record, like it's better than nothing, and then we try and, you know, kind of take the quality up a little bit. But I think one of the questions that Mike sent through here is, you know, that kind of follows on from this a little bit. It's like, what are the problems with using Wikidata to solve issues around photo competitions? And I'm going to answer very quickly is that in Ireland, our capacity for our Wikidata skills are quite low. None of us have received an awful lot of very formal training. So you notice I didn't have any of the wonderful, like, rich, delicious data that Éder had around being able to plot, because my ability to interrogate the data that we have on Wikidata is probably far significantly lower. But I'm hoping that Martin Poulter over the next month is going to remedy all of that for me through a series of workshops that he's doing. But do you have any thoughts on that, Éder? Like, what are we kind of talk about Wikidata as like it's not the panacea, it's not the silver bullet for everything. Are there downsides to using it or relying on it?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
So what Mike was asking, are there problems in using Wikidata in photo competitions? You know, we've kind of been talking about it very positively, but are there any, I suppose, difficulties that it creates as well?
I was born in Wikidata because I was an undergraduate when I began working studying with a scholarship on University of São Paulo. Then I discovered Wikidata, and then I fell in love, and I'm in love and since then in 2017, and I don't see any problems in Wikidata. I think it's the solution for this event, because I see this by the number, the number of monuments, the diversity, especially the diversity of monuments. So we had 1,500 monuments in 2018. We jumped to 10,000 this year. And we are expecting to get to 13,000 next year. And so I see the Wikidata as a solution to structure these lists. So this helps the lists, the competitions. But yeah, I don't see any negative thoughts on using Wikidata in these competitions. I think Mike has a bad experience with the English Wikipedia because they don't use Wikidata much. But in Portuguese Wikipedia, we kind of get our way in the usage, so we don't have this background. So we have a medium acceptance of Wikidata, and then we use Wikidata in our activities with Wiki Movimento Brasil in all of our activities. So I don't see any negative points I don't think it's the solution for everything, but it's not. It's positive by nature.
Can I quickly add 2 negative points, or at least things that concern me a lot? In the United States, we don't list coordinates for archaeological sites, and that's followed pretty closely in the academic literature. If you live near an archaeological site, you know it's there. And as much as I'd like to see those excluded, I think because Wikidata is open, anybody could see a gap and think that they should add the coordinates, which you can sort of figure out, but they shouldn't be there. And something that I don't think we can reflect are places that were asked not to photograph for a variety of reasons. But when you see the gap in the lists, which are beautifully constructed, you probably want to take a photo. Having visited especially sites of Afro-Brazilian religion, where there's certain trees or whatever that we're not asked to photograph, there's instances where there shouldn't be images. So I think I heard you mention something similar in Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons that I know that there are some people who very much dislike the Wiki Loves Monuments ID number within Wikidata, because Wikidata is not there for us to just populate it with our own special numbers. But it does allow us that curation level, so that even if somebody has created a Wikipedia article or created a Wikidata item for an archaeological site, so one that I know of very well is one that I grew up near, which is referred to as Ballon Hill. It's actually gotten a lot of research on it recently, but you have to negotiate with the farm owner to gain access to it, and he specifically does not want people trapping across his fields, interfering with his livestock or whatever to get to this particular site, even though it is deemed to be of national importance. So that Wiki Loves Monument ID does allow us to represent them on data without having this without using a broad property like cultural heritage or listed monument. Or actually, Ireland sits quite badly in those delineations, because we have all sorts of different types of numbers for describing things, and with National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, it doesn't actually. We often in Ireland refer to them colloquially as listed buildings, kind of borrowing from the British idea, but they don't actually necessarily infer any protection. So somebody can nominate a building to be denoted as being of architectural importance, but that doesn't mean that it's considered if somebody wants to tear it down or change it materially, but it doesn't actually protect it from any of that kind of interference, whereas listed structures tend to have some kind of protection with them. And it's something that I mentioned in the chat there, and I think you kind of noted as well, Paul and Éder, there is a level of activism through this as well that I think is really interesting, and the use of, in Ireland we've had a certain amount of interest around tracking of derelict or vacant sites, and if you're in towns and cities, if they are kind of older material of those towns and cities, they may fall within either national monuments or the inventory of heritage. And I've been in kind of nascent discussions with some of these groups, because obviously their first port of call is Google Maps, to generate a Google map. And I'm like, ooh, could you talk to OpenStreetMap instead? Or could you generate this as a data set that you then publish somewhere that then maybe we can import into Wikidata? How do you feel about maybe the intersection of that more activist space to encourage them to draw them into the Wikidata space, how it might, and the overlap that you then have with protecting and documenting the decline maybe of the sites that we're talking about? Do you feel that that's kind of is that a step too far for Wikidata and its utility in this space? Are we getting into gray areas there? Be interested in your thoughts.
I think that all photography is invasive. We've heard this quote over and over. And that's different because I live in the United States. My assessment of what that means here is very different than in Brazil. So here in Chicago, if I feel that a building is slated to be torn down, it's, I don't know if you want to call it a political act, sociological act, or just an annoyance on my part, that a historic home up the street from me was going to be torn down. So I went ahead and took 110 photos or something of it. That's probably not something I would do in Brazil. I'm not Brazilian. That's probably for folks there to determine. So there's that.
I think in some instances, first we in Brazil don't have notice. Oh, this building will be demolished. It just happened. We had a recent case, I think last year or the year before that, 2019, that we had a small village, a neighborhood here in São Paulo, and the people were living in this neighborhood is a historical one, and they were woken with the, I don't know, the machines tearing down the walls. So you have a historical protected village that had miscommunication with the constructor and the city, and they tore down historical site basically, and so you don't have notice. One thing that is critical for us, and I'm very active in this activism of protecting monuments, is the idea of this idea that Paul talked to, about what is the monument, what is the monument listed, because we have cases in Brazil, and we want to expand the notion of monuments to include in Wiki Loves Monuments. We have monuments here in São Paulo, for example. I talk about São Paulo because I live here. I have examples, live examples. You have a park that has a lot of architectural buildings, old buildings as well, that are not protected because the state government wants to sell it. So they don't protect it so they can sell it. But it needs protection. So I think that the activism involved in list these monuments and the small actions of small photographers. We have one photographer in a city in the south that is photographing the whole city. So, and he's in contact with us, and he says, oh, this address doesn't exist anymore. This building is turned down. This building became other things, like it's a commerce, and we rely on these local contributors to improve this information on Wikidata as well. If a monument is torn down, we need to add the property to this. I don't know if this contributes to this line of thinking.
And perhaps in Wikidata, an opposite situation that I'm not really sure what to do with, but I'll pass on to Éder and company. Buildings that have been significantly renovated, especially during the pandemic, and that I know of in Salvador. I couldn't really leave the city. One building that I thought would end up being demolished or just fallen, it's called Sobrado Azulejado. It's a tiled gorgeous building right in a prominent plaza that's, I don't know, been vacant and falling apart for maybe 20 years. And I visited, and it was renovated and reopened as a museum. So in Wikidata, how do we represent that progression, either positive or negative? I don't really know. So I'm going to ask Éder and company what they think about that issue. What happens when we wake up in 2021 and there's a monument or a statue across the square that burned down? So what it looks like right now is a fence. I just photographed it. And then across the square is this gorgeous tiled building that probably hasn't looked like it looks now for 50 or more years. So what's that going to look like in Wikidata? I don't know yet.
I think this question popped up earlier, that what should we do? We should create another item for this new building. I think it depends. It's a gray area, because if the building is renovated, like it wasn't demolished and rebuilt as a new building, I think in this case we could create another item. But if the building is just I don't know how to say in English, but uncharacterized and or rebuilt, like the structure is still up and you build on top of that, I think is the same item. For example, the Museu Nacional burned down, but the structure is still there. So once they secure the structure and build a new roof and secure the layers of the building, is the same building. So we shouldn't add create another item for the new renovated building, but add a significant event saying reconstruction and burn down, what happened to that monument specifically. I tend to not create another item because this creates confusion. There's a lot of things that are duplicated on Wikidata already, so we don't need two monuments unless, of course, as I said, it was a monument and in the same area you build another building, another monument, and this old one is lost.
I think Paul would. I think there is a certain amount of I suppose, just although with metadata and talking about human common sense, sometimes I can get a little bit prickly. But I think there is a certain element of, I suppose, human interpretation sometimes as to where that line is. There isn't a hard and fast point, and you can't say, if the structure is 60%, the fabric has been changed, then we make it a new. I think coming up with a hard line is quite difficult, and I don't think there is probably a hard and fast rule for that, because if we go back historically, I could look at Dublin Castle, which started off as a Viking construction, and is now would be entirely, there's now 20th century and 21st century elements to it. At what point did it cease to be a particular era of Dublin Castle and became an iteration that followed it, especially with even contemporary fires and things like that. But I think what we're talking about here, it's not just human intervention, it's also, and I think Éder kind of signaled it earlier, climate change will also become, I think, increasingly an issue with this. As, and there is a project actually between Ireland and Wales specifically looking at coastal sites and erosion and issues of falling into the sea, which thankfully is all being published under an open license. It's the Cherish project. And I suppose kind of looking at more sophisticated ways of integrating that data into existing Wikidata items and then creating the interconnectivity between them using those external documentation sites and external projects. But I think there always will be, there'll always be the human element and the interpretation of how something has changed. And we were even talking about earlier, like the name changes can even be quite prickly. In the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage, they've documented an awful lot of streets, so shops, and they capture the shop as it was, you know, in 2004, which has changed 5 times since. And I know in Wales, they're being quite strict and kind of sticking to what their inventory says, whereas here in Ireland, number 1, you know, Westmoreland Street, whatever, rather than putting the you know, whatever vape shop happens to be in it at the time. You know, so and that's very much a human decision that I've made. Probably a unilateral one, but that'll get me in trouble. But I think the human element to it kind of fascinates me in those decisions that we make. We're right at the end of our time. I just wanted to check, is there anything else that you wanted to close out to say before we finish? I think we've heard enough from me.
We also have these kind of monuments that are classified, are listed. And the name is Property of Éder Porto. And Éder Porto is a person that was alive in the 50s. And now who that property belongs to, how do we find this monument, because there's no image. And, oh, this is the property of Éder Porto. Who is Éder Porto? 50, 70 years ago lived a man here that was the owner. What is the address? But I think it's quite funny. We have monuments with more sophisticated history, and we also have this kind of small city, historical cities with monuments that are pretty much the same. Exactly the same. You need to find where they are.
I think that's time. Let's pause really quick.
Yeah. Rebecca, I'd be very curious to see what you think about the role of institutional knowledge, specifically with people who live on the site, who can talk at great length about who lived in a property, what happened to it, why it was demolished. We can't put that in a Wikipedia article. What kind of source is that? But it belongs somewhere. I guess my only thing I want to say is a huge thanks to both our organizers and presenters. Thank you so much.